working? Seems about right. Alright, so the Russian Revolution in 1917. What do we know about that?
For some background, during the beginning of the Russian Revolution, the lower classes wanted a change. A change to take down the upper class and take control of the government, since Tsar Nicholas II kept taxing people who barely had enough money to provide for their family. People did not have enough food, and inflation was rising rapidly, and they sought for a solution. All of these problems were being worsened by World War I happening at the same time as the Russian Revolution.
So there is a timeline, but we don't want to read out the entire thing because we're not that pressed for time. So it does seem that we have a few things to mention. The important parts, such as on July 12, 1914, leading up before the Russian Revolution, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. And just a few years after that, in February 27th of 1917, the Tsar ordered the use of violence after the February Revolution on the Nevsky Prospect in St. Petersburg. On March 2nd, 1917, just a few months after, the Tsar Nicholas II relinquished his throne and was executed by Bolshevik soldiers along with his family, becoming the last Tsar of Russia. And if you fast forward a few more years to about late March of 1918, and through October 1922, the Russian Civil War raged on as the revolution continued as well. You may be asking yourself, how did all of these soldiers get the firepower to take over all these places that they did? And so what happened was the Petrograd Army, or the White Army, they had access to them due to the war coming up, but the Bolsheviks, which were the Red Army, they already had them for home defense and everything. But after the revolution ended, the Russian Revolution ended a few years after 1922, their Second Amendment rights, or what we would call their Second Amendment rights, were revoked, and they couldn't have their self-defense weapons anymore.
There were four main important people during the Russian Revolution. First being Vladimir Lenin. He led the Bolsheviks to take over government buildings and strategic points. He became the leader of the Soviet Union after the Civil War. Next, Joseph Stalin. He was Lenin's right-hand man and took control of the Soviet Union after his death. He also kicked out Leon Trotsky. And moving on to Leon Trotsky, he was a part of the first failed Russian Revolution of 1905, where he was exiled and arrested. He then was brought into the Russian Revolution of 1917. After the death of Lenin, he was in a power struggle with Stalin, which led to his death. And finally, Tsar Nicholas II, Tsar of Russia, who was a big reason for the Russian Revolution for his failure to lead and rule Russia. Him and his family got executed by the Bolsheviks and then was doused in acid and thrown into a mine.
It's important to note that there was two Russian revolutions, one that happened in 1905 and one that happened in 1907. And we're going over the one that happened in 1907. And like we said earlier, it's Tsar Nicholas... 1917. And Tsar Nicholas was executed, but after he was executed, they dumped his body in acid and they threw him into a mine. So don't you think they went a little bit overkill?
Well, for the rest of the story that hasn't been told, the biggest role for the propaganda, to my knowledge, is that they were used to gain more population and get its support from different sides of the argument. But this was actually the downfall for the White Army, as they had less resources compared to the Soviet propaganda, as it would just be harder for them to gain more supporters just because they had no ink, paper, presses, artists, all of the above. But on the other hand, Soviet propaganda, it was just clear and unambiguous. They just created a big leadership among all the people.
Yeah, it's like, unlike propaganda now, the propaganda back then, it was just telling you what to do. Instead of just saying something like using subliminal messaging, fight for your country, it'll make you a better person or something like that. They're literally just telling you, hey, come fight for your country. Instead of saying you'll be a better American or you'll be a better person for it. The war will stop faster and you'll be the thank for it. Just, no, go fight. That's what they were doing.
To wrap the story in a nice bow, everything went downhill from here after the Russian Revolution. After the war broke out, there were many deaths, around millions of people murdered, just so they could take down the government.
Which war?
The Civil War of the Russian Revolution, to be exact. And this consisted in the Red Army taking down the White Army, which was the government, basically, the Providence. And this also led to the Soviet Union being formed. A bunch of people that went through its years. Lenin died, then, like Logan said, Mr. Stalin took over after the death of Lenin, and
Yes, he did.
he did kick out Mr. Leon Trotsky, who was a big piece of the story.
Which is important to note because like he barely ever gets talked about, well, overshadowed by these guys. But go ahead.
Right.
And then after that, many, many deaths. That's all it was. This is actually known as the biggest deaths in a single civil war on the Guinness World Records, which is kind of crazy.
What a world record.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Anyway, that seems about to wrap up everything. We covered most everything in the Russian Revolution. And we'd like to thank you for your time.